All right. Well, it is 7:04 if you're on the East Coast. It is another hour 04 for folks in the other parts of the country. Thank you all for coming tonight. This is the July Code for America Brigade workshop. Our topic tonight is building effective government partnerships, which for anybody who's been active in a brigade, you know that that's a big part of being successful in the work. Can other folks hear me? It looks like we're having a little bit of audio trouble. Okay, great. Yeah, so I think for any folks that are having audio issues, it may be on your end, unfortunately. All right, my name is Wolfe. I'm a senior program manager here on the network team at Code for America. I am based in Boston. My role is supporting the Brigade network as a whole, but primarily working with brigades in the eastern half of the United States. We run these workshops once a month. This is the first one that I have hosted, although I was a panelist on the previous one. Two notes that I will make before we get started here. One is that the recording of this is going to be posted on Discourse on the post that we made previously, and we'll update Slack as well as the panelists' slides. And two is that for future workshops, we're going to be doing a little bit more crowdsourcing of ideas. So look for some polls and stuff in Slack on ideas for what workshops might be helpful to folks. And if you just have ideas for a workshop that would be helpful, feel free to reach out. I'm just at Will on the Code for America Slack or wpffer@codeforamerica.org. So turning to tonight's event, I will introduce our panelists briefly and then turn it over to them. Our first panelist is Filsan Abikar. She's a colleague of mine here on the network team at Code for America. She is the fellowship program manager. Next, we'll hear from Meeker, who is the former director of constituent services in the office of Congressman Seth Moulton. She was also a government partner on a recent Code for Boston project. And then Bonnie Wolfe, who is Hack for LA's executive director and co-captain, who has worked on some very interesting brigade projects from the brigade side that have partnered with government. But with that, so I was going to stop talking, but one last thing. As folks have questions, if you can put them in the Q&A, that's a little easier for us to manage than the chat. And we will save the questions until after all three panelists have presented. We'll get to those questions and then do a little bit of discussion at that point. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A and we will get to them as soon as we're done with the presentations. But with that, I will actually stop talking this time and I will turn it over to my colleague, Filsan.
Thanks, Will. I'm happy to be here, everyone. Thank you so much. Let me get my screen share going. How are we looking, y'all? Everything looks good? All right, great. Yeah, thank you again, Will, for asking me to join the panel. And Bonnie, special thank you to you guys as well. I'm thrilled to be here with the team. I am the fellowship program manager. My pronouns are she, her. So a lot of the work that I do is continuing the relationships that have existed and what building new ones looks like. And that takes a different form in the shape of the fellowship. So I think it'd be really important to just share up front the team. So the fellowship team is myself, a program manager, and the associate director of the network, who is Hashim Tayuzi. I had an opportunity to learn about the fellowship before my time with the organization, and it became abundantly clear that a lot of the work that we did here, specifically with the program, was directly tied to government buy-in. Some interesting facts here are since 2011, Code for America has worked with over 100 government agencies and some different projects. All of these projects and the folks that we had the opportunity to work with are folks that were dedicated to change, leading the pack in innovation, and the ways that we were able to execute that and in the ways that the fellowship had done that in the past was transforming communities and the way that these communities use technology. And so what better way to share what government engagement looks like than to lift up a quote from a real champion of ours. This quote was taken directly from a post-fellowship sort of exit interview, if you will, that we conducted with a former partner of ours. And I really think that this highlights that change can be made from the inside out if you have the right champions. So he says, we in the government space, whether you're somewhere like Code for America or a Brigade member or working in an innovation department, have to be conscious that we're not saving the day against the government machine. We need to make everyone in government also a part of the movement. We talk about building with and not for. You have to invest in people, and I think that's critical if you really want to scale and you want things to last. You have to invest in the people that are already here. And again, his name is Mike Sarasti. He's the CIO of Miami. I'd like us to keep in mind that last line as we kind of move through a few more of my slides, which is investing in the people that are already here. So last year, one of the incredible teams of community fellows had set out to address the issue of affordable housing in Miami specifically. This was the first Code for America Fellowship in partnership with the city of Miami, but not the first fellowship in Miami, nor was it the first partnership with CFA around affordable housing. In 2015, a team of fellows worked to address a similar issue in affordable housing, but at Miami-Dade County. And aside from the geographic location there, that common thread between the two fellowships was Mike Sarasti. It's important to note here that Miami-Dade partnership was Code for America's first partnership in Florida. When Code for America first worked with Michael, he was a program manager at county level, similar to the role I'm in. So years since, he's transitioned into working for the city of Miami, where he now serves as the Chief Innovation Officer. He's been a longtime friend of Code for America, an advocate for innovation within his office with the local brigades, and a champion for capacity building in government. So moving into the pandemic and what that meant for our fellowship when the success of our program rests solely on government partnership and engagement, and what it looks like to get that off the ground and get into solutions and trying to find answers for all of the questions that we have. So we had to think about whether local government would even have the capacity to give the program the attention it requires. We talked about stay-at-home orders, interfering with the ability of fellows to even deliver value. And so in a time like this, what can leveraging resources and opening doors for innovation and creativity look like? So some things that we had to think of here and will be helpful, I think, as we go forward. And even in the work that I'll do as far as recruitment and schmoozing and engagement will look in 2021 will be to consider some of these things, some constraints. What does budget look like in a moment similar to what we're in right now? What do budget cuts and deficits look like? We need to talk about leadership. What is leadership in these offices and these government partners? What does that look like? Are these folks people that we need to convince of the value prop, or are they people that understand but maybe don't have the ability to make that final sign off? Are they not the right person? Do they need to sort of raise that and get that final say from someone else who might not be as in the know or in the weeds? And capacity is another really big one. In a space, now where folks are being furloughed, we also have to think of sort of value we're bringing into the space. And if there are folks that are working in these offices, are we taking opportunities away? And then just lastly, just calling out this sort of really interesting time that we're in. And interesting is a really blanket statement here of what it looked like to sort of pivot on the dime and things like moving to a virtual format. How can we continue to be mindful of big changes and what that looks like. Positional power, I think, was something that was really important for us to consider as we went into these conversations. It's not every day that we get to work directly with the CIO. Sometimes it needs to be someone that reports to CIO, or maybe the person who is a part of a brigade and might have that in, or who might know the right people in local government to make the introduction. And how are ways that we can spin that? Yikes. What else do we have? We have lackluster previous experiences. Maybe you are working to provide value and you want to establish this partnership or relationship, and maybe it hadn't gone so well in the past. So how do you bounce back from that? Obvious one that we should just call out is absorbing disappointment. Not everyone is interested. And so sometimes we just have to accept that, and we pivot and we find other people that might fit the bill. Lastly, uncovering additional intersections and how to sort of beef up and bulk up your offerings. Maybe it's not just the one solution, the one question. There might be more that we can solve with how we want to approach the problem. So ways I believe to leverage your value proposition here is in engaging these folks and your prospective government partners. What does pivoting to ways that you can be of service now look like? We talk about budget cuts. Maybe there isn't the dollars. There aren't the dollars. How do you still provide value and service? Building real relationships. It's really difficult to make an ask when there really isn't that sort of established trust. And it's also a lovely way to just have a simple conversation with someone. You get to know them a little bit, and you might realize that you have a lot more in common, and I think that really does help the conversation oftentimes. Specifically to the work I do here is in the fellowship is highlighting ways that the partnership redirects energy and talent back into the community. I think we recognize this and we know what that looks like in reinvesting. But I think it's something that we shouldn't gloss over. We should really call that out and highlight that. And then lastly, the beneficiaries of this service or product and the ways that we're able to help these people. And the sooner that we're able to sort of get moving, we're able to help vulnerable populations, and this can take shape in the form of housing and shelter, food, cash benefits, quite a few different things there. Now, establishing relationships and sort of thinking about identifying champions. I think these are some questions that I've asked myself. These are questions I think that have been helpful. Some of these have come out of conversations that I've had with Will, and even with the team here with Ann and Bonnie. So I think a really important one, specifically relating to the fellowship, is does your local office have an innovation department? Those are probably the folks that you want to target. They're very specific titles, a little bit more popular these days of folks that are more than likely on the same page as you. Another one, kind of easy here, but is really important, is like taking a look at socials. Who are these people that are goal aligned? Are they, this leads perfectly into the next point, is local change makers and officials, professors, people that have lived experience or particular interest in the work that you're looking to do. Are they connected? Who are they connected to? Who are the CPOs? Who are the folks that they're calling on to sort of spread their message? Who are their champions? And then the last two questions that I'll leave us with here are thinking a lot about when you're communicating your message, if it's during an emergency or sort of the world being on fire in the way that it is right now and facing twin pandemics. Is it going to get buried? Was there a way for us, or is there a way for us to sort of get ahead of that now that we kind of know what a pivot last minute looks like? And lastly, I think being proactive in understanding their needs and not just what it is that your program, thought, project, idea is offering. A lot of the work that we did initially was a lot of research, a lot of calls. And again, I do want to premise this by saying I recognize that my work is a little bit different in that some of those relationships are established, but it's really doing the research about local landscape and the folks that are in the community and what the hyperlocal community concerns are. And if we're able to then really understand where their priorities lie, I think it's a great way for us to go out with an ask by showing what we can offer. So I'm going to end there. Thank you guys so much for your time and listening. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pass this back to you, Will.
Well, thank you, Filsan. I think that's a great place to start. It's sort of a broad overview. of government partnerships. I will plug on Filsan's behalf that if you're interested in more of the fellowship work that she is doing, Filsan will be a panelist on a conference panel tomorrow morning. It's part of the Code for All, which is the sort of international version of Code for America. Unfortunately, for those of us in North America, the panel is at 8 a.m. Eastern time, so 5 a.m. Pacific, because it's at noon UTC, I guess is whatever the European time is. But I believe it'll be recorded. I'm gonna just put a quick link to the registration for that in the chat here that everyone should be able to see. So if you're interested in the fellowship work, both the work that Filsan is doing here in the United States and then from some folks around the world, I encourage you to check that out. We are now going to move on to Ann Meeker. As I said, Ann is the former director of Constituent Services at the Office of Congressman Seth Moulton, and she was the government project partner on a Code for Boston project called Windfall Awareness. Ann?
Awesome. Thank you, Will. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I am really excited to be here. I know that I have spoken about my experience working with Code for Boston on the Windfall Awareness Project multiple times recently, so apologies if parts of this are going to be repetitive, but tonight I really want to kind of try to distill that experience into the most practical advice that I can for anyone in a brigade who is maybe curious about working with a legislative partner as opposed to an executive branch partner or a local government agency. I think working with a legislative office is incredibly worthwhile. Obviously, I'm biased, but I want to try to kind of pitch you on why I think that's important and why you should consider it for your brigade as I talk here. So hang on, I'm going to share my screen quickly. Okay. Okay, so the very quick backstory for folks who aren't familiar. In my former role as Director of Constituent Services for a congressional office, I was fundamentally a caseworker. So when people had problems with the federal government that they couldn't resolve on their own through normal customer service channels and they called their member of Congress to complain about it, they got stuck with me. So there was a particular kind of case that kept bothering me. And it kept bothering me in part because just thinking about the demands on my time as a caseworker, it took so much of my time to handle an individual one of these cases. This is actually a screenshot from the flowchart that I used to use as a caseworker to help people understand this particular Social Security provision. I made this myself. I fully admit that it's terrible. So I heard about Code for Boston, I heard about Code for America, and I went to Code for Boston just to ask if they would help me automate this flowchart. That is all I wanted. That is all I could even comprehend was possible. And the long story short is that it took, and it's still a work in progress with my old office and the Code for Boston Windfall Awareness team. But we went from this flowchart to this beautiful thing that is a tool that just goes so far above and beyond to help constituents plan for their retirement, understand this policy, just absolutely beyond my wildest dreams. I'm not going to dwell on it here, but would encourage you to check it out at ssacalculator.org. But the takeaway for me was that the solution we came to was so much better, and the partnership that we built in working on that project was rewarding and eye-opening for me at my office, and I hope the Code for Boston team that worked on it for a whole host of reasons. So I want to focus on the 5 big takeaways for me from that perspective as a congressional staffer. But let's start with starting that partnership. Let's say you know which office you want to reach out to, you have a good reason for why. Where do you start? So my best advice would be, and I think this echoes a lot of what Filsan was just saying, but start from both ends of the org chart, especially when it comes to lobbying your member of Congress or making your voice heard on the Hill. There is a lot of very well-meaning advice out there that you should go to as high in the org chart as you possibly can right off the bat. Sometimes that's helpful. I'm not gonna lie, that is effective, but I think for brigades, what you're really looking for is to find that champion. And I think the best way to do that is to start with the frontline staff. So this is a sample org chart for your average member of Congress. Folks in blue are usually in the district. Folks in yellow here are usually in DC. People in green can be either. So the frontline staff that I'm talking about are the people who are directly constituent facing. So the constituent services team, the outreach team, over here in office management, scheduling, mail, constituent correspondence. And I think why that's important is that people are more likely to champion you if they're invested in that project from the beginning rather than delegated to that project. And then as hokey as it sounds, the best way to a legislative staffer's heart is to listen first. So the biggest thing that you're going to hear from people who've worked on the Hill is that every person who comes to a congressional office has an ask. The brigades are obviously different. You know, I think you guys, this is why I loved working with this brigade so much. Folks in the brigades come in to kind of offer this wonderful mutual collaborative partnership, but you have to get past that initial, what do you want from me, reflex from the congressional staff that you're reaching out to. So the way to do that is to build it. Filsan said it better than I can, but the way to do that is just to build that relationship. Get to know your staffer. I promise anyone will sit down with you for a 10-minute socially distant coffee informational interview. You should be reaching out to the member of Congress that represents you. Reaching out to a different office is usually not a productive way to go. And that's the least that you can ask as a constituent. You are owed that time. You know, make the best of it, but that's the least that your office can do for you, is give you 10 minutes to just talk. And that email can be as simple as, hi, I'm from a tech volunteer group and we're curious about what you do as a casework team. So do you have 10 minutes to talk to me about the issues your constituents face? It really can be that simple. And I would be really curious and interested to get that email. So ask about them, try to figure out where you can amplify each other. Like Filsan was saying, are you goal-oriented in the same way? Is there something that you can work on from there? So this is a list of questions, I have up on the screen right now, that I would have loved to be asked, that these would start me out on exactly the right footing for that relationship and really kind of show me that this isn't just an ask. This is a group that's really interested in understanding what I do and coming to me to actually form a real partnership. The flip side to that, and this is the other side of the org chart, is that once you have that person sorted, you need them to get an okay from their boss to move forward. So you want to make sure that that boss has a favorable first impression of you, that you have some credibility to build on. What's going to help your champion in that office pitch your brigade and make sure that they have the time allotted to them that's going to make your project successful. Again, free ideas that would have worked on me. Can you show that you're engaged by going to an event? You know, if you want to work with your member of Congress and they're holding a town hall, show up and ask a really good question. Meet a staffer virtually, if not face-to-face anymore. I just want to put a giant asterisk on all of this for COVID right now, but I think most of it still applies and is still effective. But when your potential partner Googles your brigade, are they going to see media coverage of your past wins? Are they going to actually see that, you know, you have experience, you know what it takes to get this project out there to the public. Dive into your elected officials' tech policy and see what you find. See if, you know, you can write a letter to the editor on it. Again, just showing you're engaged. Even if it's critical in some ways, that's still helpful. It still shows you're engaged, you care, you want to be a part of that conversation. So once you have your wonderful partner, congratulations. How are you actually going to make this work? So again, couple ways that just 3 big points for me in thinking about this. Step 1 is what's developed in my head as the control versus workload axis. So this is absolutely the most important way that I think about an office's approach to the world, and especially to collaborating with a group that they may not have a pre-existing relationship with. Does this office prioritize getting a lot done? Are they on the workload side? Awesome. That means that they've already accepted that they can't micromanage every step of a project, but they might be a little absentee in working with you. On the other side, do they prioritize perfection and absolute control over everything that has that office's name on it? Again, awesome. These are both equally valid ways to run this kind of an office, but that means that their staff is probably more used to saying no at the beginning, and they might be a little nitpicky in that process. So my hunch, and again, I've only worked for one member of Congress, I have no data to back me up here, but my hunch is that most elected officials are going to be pretty far on that control side. And again, that's really valid. There are a lot of reasons for that that make sense. And this access probably also exists independently for every office/partner relationship and can change over the course of that project. But getting a sense for where your office lands is going to be really important because that's the biggest driver of how your relationship develops. Next part is make it as seamless as possible for your government partner to keep working with you for the level of engagement that you need. So the best, I think, two of the reasons that our partnership with Congressman Moulton's office and Code for Boston really worked were that, this seems really simple, but it was so impactful. One, the Code for Boston Hack Night was on my commute home. And it happened at a time that let me be there every week, that let me put in my full work day, catch the train, and show up in Kendall Square. So that meant that I could be there and I could be engaged and involved, and it wasn't trying to slot something else into my schedule when things were already on fire all the time. And the other big thing was that we realized that we could integrate the work of the project into the work of the office really seamlessly by piggybacking on events that our office was already holding to move the ball forward on our project. So the big example, I love this picture so much. This is a picture from when we held some user testing at a town hall in the Congressman's district. The demographics worked perfectly. Our tool is aimed at retirees. Most of the people who show up to congressional events are retired. So it was a really productive relationship. It helped Congressman Moulton talk about tech and talk about retirement security in that stump speech. And it got the Code for Boston volunteers out into the community to meet the people that they were working for, which I think was really fun and really kind of drove home the impact of the work that they were doing, and also got us some great user feedback. So win all around. Step 3 is make the tech part approachable. In one of the first hack nights where our project was pitching for volunteers, my wonderful partner in crime at Code for Boston on this project, Thad Kurowski, and I agreed that I would make the pitch because I know the policy, I know the problem, but he slapped me a list of the skills and the platforms that I should tell people that we needed. And I was like, great, that's fine. I could just read this out. And I looked down at my phone and I had a panic attack. And I frantically ran to find Dad to say, how do you pronounce this? Is it SQL? Is it SQL? Who knows? But I'm about to stand up in front of a room of 50 really smart tech people and say it. So just be gentle with your partner, especially if they don't have a tech background, especially if they are frontline staff who might not have any familiarity with this world. It sounds really small and it sounds really stupid, but I think it's not. That if someone feels stupid, even completely unintentionally, just through an oversight, these are two different worlds trying to meld together into a project partnership. But if someone feels embarrassed or overwhelmed, their emotional ability to give the hours and the commitment that they need to be a productive project champion is just going to take a nosedive. So give your partner a glossary, make time for them to explain the things that they might not be familiar with, give them the tools that they need to feel really confident talking about your project, including the tech side. I really can't stress that enough. Okay, so finally, you have a project, you have a partner, it's awesome. What I really want to leave you with is just one thought on the big picture. And like I said, why I want you guys all to think about working with a legislative office. There's a lot that brigades and legislative offices have to offer each other besides just building things. As we all know, unfortunately, Congress sucks at technology for itself, for its own capacity, and for how one makes policy regulating this world that we all live in. And brigades are pools of local technologists tied into a local community with not only the capacity to develop tools like the one that we worked on with the Windfall Awareness Project, but also tech volunteers of all skill levels and backgrounds. So that not only means people who can build things, but people who can speak to the tech economy, how tech jobs work, how education works to train people to be ready for tech, how policy affects tech and technologists. The list goes on forever. And that's information that your member of Congress needs to do a good job of representing you and of thinking about the future. So I can personally tell you that when one of the Code for Boston brigaders asked me about a bill, that was the first thing I was going to do when I got back into the office after Hack Night. just that team had the credibility with me that if they cared about something, it was important, especially in an issue area that I was not already familiar with. And also, the volunteer group really showed, they were really, like Filsan was saying, they were committed in the same way that I was committed. So it felt like such a natural extension. You know, if that person that I know, that I trust, that I've worked with cares about this thing, I'm going to care about that thing too. And beyond that, working with the Brigade, especially with an eye to how little Congress has ever invested in its own tech, opened up my eyes to what other solutions were possible for intractable casework problems. And not just me either. As we worked on this, multiple times, my colleagues in Congressman Moulton's office would come up to me and go, hey, is this a thing that we can pitch to Code for Boston? And I'd usually have to say, no, it didn't really make sense. But that showed that our team was starting to think beyond the kind of schoolhouse rock, our only tool is to write a bill and get it passed mode. We were starting to think about how else can we creatively serve our constituents, especially with a House stuck in this much partisan gridlock. If our bills weren't going to go anywhere, some of them did, our office was hugely successful. But if we knew that a bill wasn't going to go the way that we wanted to, as fast as we wanted it to serve our constituents, we had another option. Not even with Code for Boston, but we could start thinking about other ways to kind of build the tools that our constituents needed and perform our oversight job. So that's my pitch. I'm always happy to answer questions. I am on the Code for America Slack and Meeker. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie.
Thanks. I didn't get the memo about, I mean, I did get the memo, but obviously ignored it about putting my slide deck into the Code for America format, so forgive me, but I'm going to share my screen with you guys right now. Okay. There we go. Okay. I'm Bonnie Wolfe from Hack for LA, and I am a relatively new Brigade lead. This coming November will be my 1-year anniversary, but I've been with the Brigade for about 1.5 years. I inherited a lot of government relationship baggage, and I'm going to tell you about that process. So, oops, wrong screen. Okay. So finding your partners is the big difficulty. Like, how do you get started if you don't already have relationships with government? And I approached this perspective of having government partnerships with the idea that we didn't have any viable relationships at the time. So the way that we did that was we went to gatherings. There are civic tech mixers where government employees come and other people can get together in Los Angeles. Your town may be different, but if there isn't one, think about making one, because what you will find is that the people who come to these by and large are very much like Anne. You know, they're committed to government. They're usually new in their service. They have all of the idealism that drives people into government service and are ready to hit the ground running. And of course, what they're getting is a real dose of reality about how little you can actually do because of the resources available and all the roadblocks that exist. And the Brigade is an opportunity to empower these people to take that idealism back to their offices and say, actually, yes, we can do this. We do have, you know, that we have new tools and new resources at our disposal that we're not competing necessarily with other people for. And that was the message that we took to, you know, to these social mixers that we went to, is let's just meet some people and tell them about Hack for LA and what we're capable of. Basically, that they have a development shop at their disposal if there's something that we can do that will help, you know, improve the outcomes for the people in the city of Los Angeles. And then I would say email. Email is your friend. Get introductions to people. Whoever you know, leverage it for another introduction until you find somebody who's receptive to your message. So see people in person, you know, post COVID-19, and emails. Okay, it keeps going off my screen. All right, relationship management. So then, having said that, don't bite off more than you can chew because you still have to manage these relationships. We manage them via email, we manage them with Google Docs, Google Drive, and all of its various documents, and GitHub. We use GitHub for task tracking and overall project management. And we even have government partners who are now commenting on issues. So there's a whole training process that goes on. But the deeper integrated you are with the tools that your government partner is using and the tools you're using, the more effective the relationship will be. The other tool that's not on here is Zoom, which we now have moved all of our meetings onto Zoom. And we have one government relationship where we meet with them every 2 weeks to discuss the project on the project. And we have 1 to 2 hours Zoom meeting every 2 weeks. Amazing. Okay, the next thing is, oops, I feel like we skipped some things. Oh yeah, I did. Okay, sorry. Partners, projects, and impact. So let me tell you about the partners that we do have. So when I first came to the Brigade, we actually had this partnership for HEART with the LA City Attorney's Office. I was very new. I literally just walked in the door. I was a developer trying to figure out, how I was going to get better at being a developer so I could actually work. And the team had already just started like a week before I joined on this project with a design sprint that usually is 5 days, but what they've done is they've broken it down into 5 nights, the night of our hack night. And they've gotten Gina, who works in the city attorney's office, to show up and every night for five Monday nights and be part of this design sprint. And that was to help them figure out basically what they could do to make their program run better. The HEART program is, its function is to help people experiencing homelessness get rid of traffic infractions that they have so that they can be eligible for city services. So in the city of Los Angeles, if you have a ticket for jaywalking, spitting on the sidewalk, etc., you are barred from many city services. And so the process that the city is taking as part of their incremental improvement process is to run this program called HEART, which will help expunge those records and get the people into supportive services. So what we determined as design sprint was what they most needed was not a whole new set of software, but they really just needed software that helped them use the software they were using now better and use the information they were using now better so they could process more cases because they had a huge backlog. They had what looked to them like a 1-year backlog within the first 6 months of the program. So you could see how that would be exponentially problematic for the department and for the residents that it was serving. So what we ended up doing was helping build a prototype and keep iterating on that prototype until they signed off on it. And then the city's internal development department created an application. Within a month of that application launching, we increased the processing of those applications by 260% and completely cleared up the backlog immediately. So, and that was in 1 quarter that they increased by 260, and so no backlog. So that project was a great success. It was not a great success from the standpoint of what we originally intended to do, which is we intended to build them a tool that would do all of this. But through a lack of experience with requirements gathering, some politics, through an inherited relationship with the city, and a variety of other things, we ended it at the prototype stage. But the value was still achieved. And that's what's most important, is we grew as a brigade, we started to learn what our weaknesses were, and the residents of the city of Los Angeles, who we ultimately serve, got the services that they need and deserve. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's a massive success, even though it didn't match what we originally intended. So I would say really go into these projects, these partnerships with an agile mindset that you're not going to necessarily get even the solution for your brigade, not even just the development solution, but whatever you think you're going to get out of it, you're going to learn something. And that makes it a success. So our next project was a more intentional project. We showed up to a civic tech mixer, and I made friends with the people from Neighborhood Empowerment, one of the new young staffers who had joined. And out of this, we developed a project called 311 Data. And the idea behind 311 Data is to increase political engagement at the neighborhood council level. So in Los Angeles, there are 99 neighborhood councils, and basically each one of them is supposed to tell the city council what they think of any legislation that comes down. That is how the City Council of Los Angeles makes decisions for 4.1 million people, is that they're waiting for the neighborhood councils to tell them how the local citizens feel. So if people in Los Angeles are not involved in their neighborhood council, then they're not making it heard, right? They make it heard at the neighborhood council level. Neighborhood council writes community impact statements. Those get attached to the legislation record, and they get read and poured over by committees and by the city council themselves. So we need to increase engagement at that level. We estimate that about 5% of Los Angelinos are actually engaged at the neighborhood council level. So we aim to increase that political engagement. We haven't figured out exactly how we're going to measure that, but part of it is this 311 tool where we help residents and neighborhood councils start to communicate how city services work and what kind of experience that you're having, and compare your services against other neighborhood councils, really data literacy for neighborhood council members. That project is still ongoing. We're just about to launch. I will say this about this relationship. We've just recently been asked to hold our launch because the mayor's office, someone we don't have a partnership with, is going to launch a product, and when we launch ours, it's going to be embarrassing for them because they have not put in the same amount of work on 311. They put in some amazing work on a lot of other areas, but not on 311 data. So we're in the process of negotiating with our government, with both neighborhood empowerment and the mayor's office, about how we can just include our tool into their tool instead of setting up a situation where we are creating negative feelings, both at the neighborhood council level and at the mayor's office level. Good luck to us. We'll let you know how that goes. LADOT, this is a really fascinating project. It was a walk-in. We are starting to develop a relationship with the city, but also other brigades have relations with cities, and that will benefit you. So reach out to your other brigades across the network and let them know that you want them to let their city folks know that when they talk to their counterparts, to mention your brigade. So City of San Francisco has a brigade, and they mentioned our brigade to they have worked with the City of San Francisco has worked with the San Francisco brigade, and so when the LA Department of Transportation representative spoke to their counterpart in San Francisco saying, hey, I see you have traffic demand management calculator. How did you do that? They're like, Code for America is amazing. And we got contacted. So in the door walked Rosemary from LADOT, and this project, she came and said, can you guys do this in 2 months? And crazy me, I was thinking, we don't have enough government relationships, so yeah, we can do it. And so a year later, the project is just about to go before the city council. And what's amazing about this project, and I'm going to tie this all together in a second, is this project is actually transforming the way that legislation is created in the city and then reviewed by the city and its citizens. Because if you have any experience at all with legislation, you'll know it gets crafted. Eventually, if it gets approved, then there's the implementation period, and goodness knows how long that will take. And so this process basically aims to create a usable tool before the legislation is even approved, so that people can actually test it during the approval process. And then once approved, we have a very much shorter on-ramp to launching the tool that will make the process possible. So for us, this is an experiment in changing the way government and its citizens and even legislation is rolled out. Okay, so those are some projects. We feel like we've kind of crossed that bar. With the city, we have some good positive relationships. So how do you find new partners, especially in this age of COVID? And that is, you can't go to social meetings anymore. So email, again, is your friend, and reaching out to the people you already have any relationship at all on from the city front, and saying, who else can you connect us with? Start asking projects inside your brigade. You know about this other project. What kind of tangential information might that department have that they can share with us? And that starts to expand the relationships. So main thing is important is designing the engagement. So you need to decide up front what services that you're providing, design, development, maintenance, and based on that, you need to staff the team appropriately, and you need to set expectations. We did not do that with the HEART project. We now do that on all of our projects. Relationship management. Oh, I covered this already. Reputation. Okay. What to do about legacy reputation? Well, what we've mainly done is avoid the people who didn't like us very much and try to focus on the people that like us, replacing bad history and with good new examples of what we can do. You as a brigade lead, I assume there's many brigade leads on this, are inheriting the history of your brigade for good or bad. Capitalize on the good, make new examples of good to replace the bad, and eventually this too shall pass. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bonnie. I am eternally impressed by all of the partnerships that you all have at Hacker LA. It's quite a brigade. So from here, we have a couple of audience questions that we'll get to. I think we have panelists have a couple of questions for each other for discussion. I did want to just take 3 or 4 minutes. One question that came up in the pre-discussions for this. So tonight's topic is, what do you do when you have how do you form government partnerships? The question that came up is, what do you do when you have a project that is a priority that the government partner that you need to be on board isn't on board and doesn't want to work with you for whatever reason? And there can be a multitude of reasons. And an example of that came up in my mind was a project at Code for Boston that I worked on for a little while. But it looks like Michelle from Code for Boston is on right now, and I wanted to invite her to just spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about how that project has progressed in the absence of a willing government partner. Michelle, if you wouldn't, I'm going to ask you to press the raise hand button if you are prepared to speak. I don't want to just put you on the spot. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to allow to talk.
Hello, I'm Michelle. Nice, I can talk. It's so freeing. So yes, we're working on a project at Code for Boston called Clean Slate, which is meant to help people who are trying to seal or expunge their criminal records, do that more effectively and have better access to that service. So we reached out, as part of our efforts, we reached out to probation in Boston to try to discuss what, and we went at it a bit how you all described it. We went in and said, how can we help here, right? If you had something you could change, what would it be? And the answer was nothing, which was very surprising to me. But they seem to have it the way they want it for various reasons. And I wanted to talk more about metrics, but I don't think they were quite, that's not where their focus was at. So in the meantime, without that buy-in, there are design problems that we can't yet overcome. But despite that, we've decided that we're working to work with local legal services, Greater Boston Legal Services specifically, to provide a service online for people to be able to fill out a form and then to generate the PDF. Because the PDF, the form that, for example, for juvenile sealing is very, it has 2 checkboxes, but there is no way to understand what it is you're supposed to check off and what will be the consequences if you do check off one and turn it in. And so to provide context to users, to provide an understanding of what process they're going into and what other processes they might need in order to support what they're trying to do. So we're hoping to provide that context as well as to help point them to resources that might help with that, or surrounding issues like homelessness or difficulties with jobs and that kind of thing. So we're hoping through that avenue to be able to still provide at least a part of the service, and to therefore, if we can create a proof of concept that we can spread word about, if we can design it well, we might be able to show our still prospective, hopeful government partner that there is a need for this kind of tool, and there is a desire out there for this kind of improvement in service, and for that there's more of a need out there than they might currently see with their tools. Yeah, and I don't know if I'm supposed to take questions, but I think that's approximately what I had to say.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I think that it's a really good example. In a way, it is replacing the bad with the new, as Bonnie talked about, where it's figuring out where you can make an impact, even if you do run into a brick wall, especially if it's, on something. Obviously, record expungement is a priority for the legal services partners in Boston. It's a priority for Code for America as a whole. And it's, you got to find a way to make a difference where you can. Great. Well, if folks have questions for Michelle, you can type them in the Q&A. I think at this point we'll move on to some other questions. So I'm going to read a question that we have in the chat box. There's few enough of us here that if folks have questions that they would just want to ask verbally, you're welcome to raise your hand and I'll let you talk. I just do want to mention before I do that Code for America does have a code of conduct. I assume that everyone pretty much here is here because you've been involved in a brigade, which means you are familiar with the code of conduct. If you are not familiar with it and want to take a look at it before you talk, I'm just going to post it in the chat here. The cliff notes of it is be respectful, but that's a good thing to take a look at. So the question that I have here, which I think we can do, it's sort of a question for everybody. Thad asks, Thad says, introduce the idea of a glossary for a partner at an intermediate point of a partnership. Can any of you think of examples where you heard of or saw a partner starting to get cold feet and things got back on track because you provided this kind of attentive affirmation? So you provided the resources that they needed in order to feel comfortable with tech stuff that wasn't, that they weren't originally comfortable with.
I guess I'll speak to it. I did answer this in the Q&A too. So I can't speak to the glossary because we've never built a glossary, but I can say that the level of detail that we go to for our partners, including things like every 2 weeks when we meet with the LADOT on Zoom, we have a slide deck which has all of the designs that we're in process of reviewing, screenshots, all that, and then they can share that throughout their organization, but it has all with the deliverables of everything that we're working on, where it is in process, links to the issues, that level of attention to detail is much appreciated. And they've said many times, like, it just makes working with us a pleasure. And they do it like anytime they bring somebody new onto the call, the lead of the project will spend like 10 minutes just talking about how much he likes working with us. And I think that kind of, him feeling like he needs to let the people in the call know from his side, like, hey, be really nice to these people. They're doing this amazing job. And also that he feels like he gets it, that we literally run on praise. You're not paying us. So we literally run on praise. And I think that kind of thing is like, could it fix a relationship? I don't know. I don't think you can fix a relationship that's already gone bad, but can you make sure a relationship doesn't go bad? Yeah.
I think that's really good advice. I also will say that I think that this idea of making tech approachable is also really important to attracting non-technical brigade members. A lot of people, myself included, came to Code for America without any technical background. I mean, I came into it with like a sort of general interest in computer stuff, but like no ability to write code, no ability to understand how to use GitHub. And it was a little bit intimidating going to an organization where the first word in the name is code. But I think that finding a community of people that was open and welcoming and patient and values explaining acronyms and things like that is just a really important part of having an open and inclusive community, which obviously is our goal at Code for America and in the brigades. Anne and Filsan, do you want to weigh in on that last question before we move on to something else? Cool.
We'll just take a second to just, again, thank the folks at Code for Boston who did do that for me so that I never got too scared to ever come back. Yeah, and part of that was also, I think, and I think this gets to your point as well, but giving the non-technical partner jobs that they can feel confident doing. I think once we divvied up labor at one point where I onboarded folks because that was kind of the base like the entry level understanding of the tech, but it was also more just explaining the policy and the problem, which like I could do all day ad nauseum. Everyone got tired of hearing me talk about this problem. So just thinking about just what can you give for a non-technical partner, what job can you give them where they're going to feel engaged and is going to move the project forward? Also, if you have more of a relationship like we did, where like the partner was coming to Hack Night every night to actually be there as the thing is being built.
Yeah, I think maybe this is a little bit off the company line, but I do think that in some senses, I have heard from brigades, including my own Code for Boston, that it is harder to find non-technical folks. It is harder to find design or project management or things like that. At least in a city that has like a couple of boot camps that are going to produce people who have the time and energy and passion to do something like this. And so like the name Code for is like a little bit of a hurdle to get over. And I think that being super inclusive and welcoming is a big part of that. So I'm picking out a couple of questions here that we put in the chat beforehand. I think one really interesting one is, and I suppose it's more for Filsan and Bonnie, although Anne will certainly have a different or a perspective from the other side on it, is how do you divide up your eggs? So how much do you invest a lot of time in one partnership versus spreading out your relationships as much as possible and trying to just sort of have a broad network in government?
Good question, Will. Let's see. What does divvying that up look like? Specific to the work that I do, I think in a way we kind of have to put our eggs in one basket. But you know what I think is really brilliant about that is, again, and being very sensitive to the way that this program is different. There's a lot of convincing that we do have to do with that person. This might speak a little bit to the question earlier of what really sharing that that thing that they want to hold on to and sort of like spread within their organization as gospel looks like. So I think for us, there's like a lot of investment that goes into you know, really the champion of the program, and then we're lucky in that way that they're the ones that raise that up to the CIO or the folks that are making the calls at the end of the day and say, this is important and we need to do this. We saw that this year with the fellowship, and it was really brilliant because we had very senior level partners that were the ones that waved the wand and made it happen. And then we had the folks that we had engaged several times, and there were multiple calls, different teams, folks that we sort of needed to onboard and get them to get on the same page as us, so that they're you know, internally, but like what would be our sort of like extension of the team was like all bought in. So I say for the fellowship, yeah, all the eggs are kind of in a basket, and then that usually works if your value prop is tight.
And I would say that, you know, Filsan has a much harder lift because they have to get financial buy-in on the project before they can move forward. And that really requires you defining a lot more upfront. We don't have to define quite as much upfront because we're not asking them for any money. That's another conversation for later. But it does let us to move at whatever pace they want to move at. But I will say that we have had some experiences where we start things off with a government partner, and even I had one experience where, I won't say who the government partner was, but I asked for a proposal because I had some, you know, misgivings about their commitment to it, and they wrote me up a whole proposal. It came on city stationery, etc. And then we started the UX process, and it turned out that they were not really into open source for this particular project. They really wanted it to be kind of all developed behind the scenes and nobody sees it, and then have the legitimate reason that LATDM does, which is we need to get the legislation in front of the city council and open for public comment before we start leaking it to people. You know, so there was no like reasonable endpoint. They were just like, we never want any of this information to be public until, you know, 2 years from now. And so as part of that discovery process, they realized that they had an internal vendor that for cool $1,000, they could have this internal vendor, you know, build out this application and it would do exactly what they wanted and nobody would ever see it. And they decided that because of liability issues, that made more sense. We had a lot riding on it emotionally, but we're not paying developers. We didn't put together a team, not any of the stuff that Code for America has to do to get a project off the ground. So I think that it provides us some opportunity for flexibility, but I think it was also a really good lesson about how we need to emotionally protect the members of our brigades, because they do put a lot of heart and soul even into the smallest of efforts of crafting, you know, proposals and things like that. And one of the solutions for us is just more projects, right? With more projects, with more irons in the fire, you know, and letting people, and kind of anytime there is a government relationship involved, letting know that there potential this could take a sideways turn because a person higher up the food chain, so to speak, can highlight an issue that will make the relationship untenable, or the project untenable. And so kind of setting expectations inside of our brigade, I think, are important. But also, I will say that as soon as possible into the engagement, you've got to find out who the person is who says yay or nay, because you could get pretty far down that road. And I did feel like that was happening with LATDM. So I forced early on, I forced it into like, I actually need to meet with, you know, your boss who's the sponsor of this. And we ended up meeting with their entire team, which was perfect because it set the stage for all the great things that came after.
That actually brings me to another question that we had sort of batted around a little bit, which is how do you find out, I mean, both find who the person that actually needs to say yes at the end of the day versus being like a well-meaning, enthusiastic junior staff member who doesn't have the ability to devote their boss's staff time to it. And then how do you sort of make sure that you have the buy-in that you need to make sure that the project has some longevity? Do folks have advice on that?
Ask them. Ask the person who's bringing it to you.
I do think that a government tends to be a hierarchical enough organization that like people probably know who needs to say yes to it. Does that comport with your experience, Anne?
Yeah, absolutely. And just, yeah, having a really explicit conversation with that partner, like the junior level partner up front, about just what are your other responsibilities? What do you, I mean, obviously none of us could have seen the pandemic coming, and this is kind of a very unusual edge case, but I think as we worked on our project, I also got pulled away into a couple of just everything is on fire. We had a local crisis that just required a lot of my time. And it worked out again, because like we had that core group of volunteers who understood it well enough by that point to kind of keep it running. But if I were doing it over again, I would ask, and from the brigade perspective, not the government perspective, I would ask my potential partner, like, what things could catch on fire that would pull you away from this? Another thing that brings me to that I wanted to just touch on really briefly is being prepared for turnover in a government office. Especially, I know I've just told everyone to reach out to junior staffers, but the turnover rate in Congress is insane. Going back to the question of putting eggs in baskets, I think also having a conversation really early with that partner about who is going to take this on if you get promoted, and kind of encouraging them to loop other colleagues at least kind of into the process as early on as possible is also a smart way to go.
That actually leads really nicely. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bonnie.
Oh, I realized follow on to this, and actually I think we're definitely employing this now in conversations that we're having with government. At one point in the LATVM relationship, we asked one too many questions, and it tipped over into the, wait a second, do we have a data sharing agreement with these people? And a higher up mentioned that, and we didn't. And so we basically had to put the entire project on pause for 4 months while that got resolved. And it ended up in this limbo where this LA City Attorney's Office had to sign off on it, but it wasn't a high priority because the legislation wasn't going before the city. It became this thing where it never was going to get approved. And so finally, after when we were like on month 3, I just said, hey, so what's the date that I got on with our partner. I said, what's the date that you want to put this in front of the city council? And then she gave me a date, and I said, okay, so 2 months before then, we need to be done so that we can actually fix the bugs in the last month and nothing else. And then about a month before that, we need to be, just working on I just kind of walked it back from her. So I said, so you would have to tell me tomorrow that we had a data sharing agreement in order for us to hit that deadline. And I'm also calling you because I'm going to retask the team on another project, and you're welcome to come back to us when you're ready, but I'm just going to put you in the queue. We only could do so many projects at any given time. So you would be back in the queue, and then, you might have to wait 2 or 3 months before we had another opening. And within a week, we had movement on they picked a deadline, they worked the date back, and then they got the city attorney's office. So in hindsight, what I really did by having that conversation with her, she took it better than obviously it could have gone, is I gave her the tool that she needed to have influence inside. And so that's what I would say we really learned about it, is have that conversation early with your partner and figure out what ammunition can you give that junior partner that is going to help them close the deal inside and keep it moving.
I would like to underscore that point with a big black magic marker. As a person who has spent most of my career working in large bureaucracies, not in government and universities, but as a junior person who wants something to happen quickly, having the person that you're working with help you figure out the lever you need to pull to make it happen quickly is really, really helpful. That question, I think, segues really nicely into just this question of, there's sort of 3 different types of government staff. There's the elected person, there's the political appointee, and there's the sort of career staff. Do you think about approaching those people differently from each other? Have you had more luck with one type of job than another, or do you just is it just a personality thing?
I don't have enough experience to answer that question. How about you, Filsan?
As I dropped the note that says, I don't know if I have as much to contribute here. Listen, if you are on the inside, to me, you are the one. So.
I think the only thing I can really contribute, because again, I worked for an elected office that has a constitutionally low-key adversarial relationship with all other types of government folks, is to just kind of be aware of that difference. And that's something that's really important from the very beginning. The relationship as it developed working on our project was, again, we were a legislative branch office working on an app that we hoped would change the way an independent agency's public-facing tool worked. We wanted to help Social Security make their retirement calculator better, because Lord did it need it. And that relationship really kind of shaped how our project developed. So we started out thinking, how can we build a prototype that we can then give to Social Security for them to just use and make their calculator better. And so we worked with their congressional liaisons, we worked with their tech people, and eventually we're just kind of told, no, we have our list of things that we are going to make better about our public interface. We're so sorry, but this doesn't fit in our priority list. And by that point, we were still really invested in the project. So we thought, how can we, I wish it wasn't this way, but the only other tool that Congress has to use is the bully pulpit. So how can we kind of make this widely available to our constituents so that they have it and can use it and it will make their lives better? And how can we think about using that to nudge Social Security into reordering their priority list, because we think this should be higher on it. So just kind of being clear, and that this is also something, just make sure that your government partner is clear with you about what this network of relationships looks like. I think being upfront that, hey, we're going to try to get this into Social Security, but we don't expect them to take it. And so the path for this is going to have to go somewhere else. Was something that was, always difficult to navigate. It always hurts to be told no. And again, like we were talking about with our volunteers and their emotional buy-in to this project, I think it was tough we all assumed this should be Social Security. And it was tough for folks to hear, this just isn't going to work out the way that we wanted it to. And it's not going to work out in part because the office that we're working with doesn't have the lever to pull to make that happen. I think that was a very wordy way around what I wanted to say there, but just be aware of that difference and ask your partner how it works up front.
I think that really relates to what Michelle was talking about earlier, just understanding that you may not be able to make 100% of the impact with 100% of the buy-in that you hope. And the idea of the bully pulpit, I mean, a lot of the sort of theory of change behind the Clean Slate project in Boston was that if we could improve the outside, the external parts of this process enough, it would become obvious that you're sort of hitting a brick wall when you get inside, and that would make it a lot more obvious that there is a change that needs to happen. And it's a change that can happen. I mean, frankly, Brigade volunteers and brigades as a whole put an enormous amount of time and effort into these projects, but in the scale of building government IT and government tech procurement, it's tiny. It's a little bit of effort that could, if you point it in the right direction, make a huge difference in people's lives. And sometimes you make that difference, and sometimes you just need to make it obvious that difference isn't being made by the people who can make it. I want to underscore something that Anne talked about earlier about the value of working with congressional offices. I think that a lot of brigade work ends up being focused on municipal government, and I mean, I'm like a municipal government fan. I don't know if that's like the right way to put it, but I think there's a lot of focus on city and local government in the brigade network. But I think that if you find the right congressional office, you can find people who are able to have a lot more leeway than folks who are working in like a city transportation department or a city innovation technology department or something like that. You do have to find the right people, and you do have to be aware that there's a lot more uncertainty, but when you find those people, you can do really interesting stuff. It's also an opportunity. Early on in my career in civic tech, long before I even knew about Code for America, I worked on a project that had to do with building better tech for Congress. And if you are a person who values bipartisanship, and I recognize that bipartisanship, people have different and valid feelings about the value of bipartisanship and ideology, but you find really interesting viewpoints. And so two of the most active members of Congress in this like hackathon series that we were running in Congress were Darrell Issa in California and Jared Polis, who was is now the governor of Colorado and was a member of Congress from Boulder. Two members who are on completely opposite sides of the ideological spectrum, but both care a lot about technology and both care a lot about government working as well as it should. And I just thought that that's like, it's kind of cool to find, to remind yourself that by and large people get into government because they care about it working for people. Amen
to that. I'm just add another, just to put an even finer point on that than you already have, Will. And go back to one thing I mentioned earlier. Part of why I would encourage folks to reach out to caseworkers in particular is that every member of Congress has a casework team, and those people all see the same problems over and over and over again, no matter where you are in the country, no matter what political affiliation your boss has. Every member of Congress's office is going to have someone who works with Social Security, someone who works with veterans, someone who works with immigration, someone who handles a miscellaneous bucket that's probably got education, taxes, the Postal Service, TSA, et cetera, depending on where you are. So there's already common ground there for members of Congress to work together and members of Congress to work with something like a brigade. My former boss always used to make fun of me because I worked on the draft for a bill that we introduced to just increase accessibility and constituent-facing communication from federal agencies. And our lead co-sponsor was Mark Meadows, who was very ideologically opposed to my boss, who I said, nicely done, Anne, getting Mark Meadows reelected on a government accessibility bill. But you know what? If the letters from the IRS are easier, I don't care. So
that's a good way to put it. Well, this feels like a good place to end, unless folks have either folks in the audience or the panelists have other questions. I think this was really valuable, and I think for folks who spend their time going to brigades and coming to webinars about brigades on nights that they're not going to brigades, it's just sort of a fun topic to talk about. So thank you all to our panelists. Thank you to Michelle for sharing Clean Slate with us, and thank you to all the folks who logged on to watch us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Will, and all the other panelists.
thank you, Will. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, folks. The video for this will be up on the discourse tomorrow.